Art mirrors the human condition.
We uncover its hidden patterns,
Experience human creativity.
elevated by digital analysis.
Welcome to the Academy.
Join the journey.
All right, let's jump right into this explainer and completely deconstruct a masterpiece you probably think you already know. Today, we're going face-to-face with an absolute titan of the Dutch Golden Age, Rembrandt van Rijn's The Night Watch. But, here's the thing about famous historical artifacts. The stories we pass down over the centuries, they often completely bury the incredible, and honestly sometimes bizarre truth of their creation. So we're going to peel back those layers right now.
Let's kick things off with a massive paradigm shift. What if the most famous night painting in all of history was actually set in broad daylight? I know, it sounds impossible, right? The word night is literally right there in the title the whole world uses. But, as we'll see, history has a pretty funny way of applying a filter to the truth, and in this case, that filter was completely literal.
Section 1. The truth behind the title. Uncovering the daylight and the damage.
To get to the truth of what Rembrandt actually painted, we really need to strip away centuries of historical lies. If you scan down the actual details of this piece, you're going to see a real mouthful of a title. Militia Company of District 2nd under the command of Captain Frans Bannock Kock. Wow. But right away, that reveals something huge. The phrase, "The Night Watch," is literally nowhere to be found in the official original name of the artwork completed back in 1642. The title we all know today, it's an absolute historical invention.
So, how did we get it so incredibly wrong? Well, the painting is a huge historical misnomer. Over the centuries, this canvas was coated and recoated with a really dark, thick varnish. By the time late 18th century art historians were documenting it, that varnish had aged and darkened so severely that they genuinely believed they were looking at a night scene. It wasn't until modern restorations meticulously washed all that dark gunk away that the truth finally came out. This explosive, dynamic scene is actually taking place in broad daylight with brilliant sunshine striking the figures. And tragically, that whole misunderstanding about the lighting, it's not even the worst thing that happened to this canvas. In 1715, the massive painting was moved to the Amsterdam Town Hall. But there was a slight problem. The wall they picked between two doors was just too small. So what did they do? I kid you not, they literally chopped off pieces on all four sides of the canvas just to make it fit. Those cut pieces were permanently lost, which devastatingly off-centered our main characters and completely wrecked Rembrandt's original, carefully balanced composition.
Moving on to Section 2, 17th century paid group selfies, the wealthy volunteers behind the canvas.
So who exactly are these people, and why on earth are they painted on such a massive scale? To wrap our heads around that, we have to look at the culture of 17th century Amsterdam. The men in this painting are civic guards, or cloveniers. But listen, these weren't professional battle-hardened soldiers. They were voluntary city militias made up of wealthy, prominent citizens, merchants, clothiers, businessmen. And it was this massive tradition for these companies to hire top-tier artists to paint what were essentially giant, flattering group selfies to hang up in their meeting halls. It was all about status, prestige, and making sure everyone saw how important you were.
Which brings us back to Captain Frans Bannock Kock and the men behind him. The captain and 17 of his guardsmen each paid a substantial sum of their own personal money to get into Rembrandt's painting. Think about that. Every single one of these 17 guys paid top dollar, fully expecting a highly prominent, deeply flattering, and let's be honest, ego-boosting depiction that would immortalize them for all their peers to admire.
Section 3. Breaking the Rules of Art. How Rembrandt Shattered the Static Portrait Convention.
Now, what's really fascinating here is how Rembrandt took their money and then completely defied the expectations of his paying clients. Before Rembrandt, Dutch group portraits were incredibly static. Basically, if you paid for a portrait, the artist painted you and your buddies standing or sitting in neat, orderly rows. Think of a modern, tiered school photograph. Everyone gets equal lighting, everyone's face is perfectly visible, and it's fundamentally kind of boring. But Rembrandt, he shattered the rules. He threw out that school photograph style entirely. Instead, he painted the company in chaotic, dynamic motion, capturing the exact explosive moment the captain gives the order to march and the men step forward. To manage all this chaos, Rembrandt leaned heavily into a specific technique called chiaroscuro. Let's define that real quick. It's the artistic use of intense contrasts of light and shadow to deliberately guide the viewer's eye. And this technique is exactly how Rembrandt controls where you look amidst the swirling action of this militia stepping out. This brilliantly illustrates the genius and, frankly, the absolute audacity of Rembrandt. That masterful chiaroscuro lighting falls brilliantly right on the central figures. You've got Captain Cock right in the middle in stark black, and his lieutenant next to him in gleaming radiant yellow. But what about the other men? You know, the guys who also paid good money to be seen? Rembrandt literally lets them fade into the atmospheric gloom of the background. Some are obscured by shadows, others by weapons. He straight up prioritized the dramatic lighting of the scene over the individual visibility of his paying clients.
And he didn't just play with light, he played with space. Rembrandt uses a technique called foreshortening to completely break the 3D barrier. If you look at the lieutenant's spear, it's angled to point directly out at you, the viewer, and the captain's hand stretches forwards so realistically that it actually casts a distinct three-dimensional shadow right onto the lieutenant's uniform. It creates this unbelievable illusion, making it look like these figures are popping right out of the canvas and stepping right into your physical space.
Plus, it's not just a visual masterpiece, it's an auditory one. If you look closely at the actions captured here, you'll realize the painting is remarkably loud. It's an immersive, multi-sensory canvas. You can practically hear the chaotic drum being beaten on the right, the dog barking wildly at all the commotion, a musket actually firing into the air just behind the captain, and men shouting orders over the din. It is quite literally a snapshot of sensory overload.
Section 4. Power, Ego, and Hidden Symbols. The philosophical weight hidden within the canvas.
Let's move to our final layer and see how all this dynamic action, rebellious lighting, and historical context builds into a profound philosophical statement. Philosophically, this painting is an absolute triumph of the Dutch Republic. Remember, these guys aren't aristocrats. They aren't professional royal soldiers answering to a king. They're everyday merchants, clothers, and businessmen. So depicting them with such monumental grandeur symbolizes a massive democratic power shift. Power is moving away from hereditary royalty in the church and shifting right into the hands of the civic, mercantile middle class. It's a massive celebration of a whole new kind of society.
But within that new society, there is a serious tension between individualism and the collective. The crucial point here is that Rembrandt actively wrestled with the massive egos of his subjects. Yes, each man paid good money to be celebrated as an individual, but Rembrandt ultimately decided that the artistic unity of the composition and showcasing the collective strength of the militia was vastly more important than their individual vanity. He subordinated their egos to serve a much greater artistic and civic message.
And amidst all this heavy philosophy, Rembrandt still found room for a solid joke. Remember the term cloveneurs we learned earlier? The Dutch term for musketeers, which is the type of militia depicted here? Keeping that exact word in mind is the absolute key to unlocking the strangest, most fascinating hidden secret in the entire composition. If you look just to the left of the center, standing out amidst all these dark, chaotic men, you are going to find the glowing girl. She's bathed in this ethereal, almost divine light. But here's the catch. She's not a real person who just happened to be walking by. She is a mythic, allegorical mascot for the company. Now look closely at her belt. She is carrying a dead chicken with very prominent claws. In Dutch, the word for claw is klauw. It is a direct, literal, visual pun on the name of the cloveneurs. I mean, Rembrandt literally grounded this hyper-realistic, action-packed scene with a glowing mascot carrying a dead chicken, all just to make a visual dad joke about musketeers incredible. It's brilliant, it's defiant, and it's entirely unique. So as we wrap up this explainer on the Night Watch, looking at how Rembrandt completely ignored the demands for a standard group portrait, plunged his paying customers into the shadows, and prioritized dynamic action over individual faces, we have to ask a final question. When crafting a legacy, what matters more? Was Rembrandt right to sacrifice his clients' personal egos and individual vanity in order to create a collective masterpiece that has outlived them all? It's definitely something to think about the next time you find yourself trying to stand out in a crowd. Thanks for joining me on this deep dive, and keep questioning the history behind the canvas.